The blood-soaked telegram trembled in Caleb Reeves' weathered hands as he stood frozen on his front porch, the Montana sunset casting long shadows across his face. Nurse arriving Thursday. Governor-approved request. Prepare accommodations. The words blurred before his eyes as he folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart where a glimmer of hope now resided for the first time in weeks. Kearney, Montana Territory, 1878, was no place for the faint of heart. The small cattle town nestled at the foothills of the Rockies had seen its share of hardship, but none had struck closer to home for Caleb than the accident that had left his 10-year-old son, Thomas, hanging between life and death for the past month. The boy had fallen from his horse while helping with the spring cattle drive, trampled beneath hooves and panic. Doc Simmons had done what he could, but the internal injuries and broken leg required more skilled care than he could provide. Caleb gazed across the sprawling ranch that had once been his pride and joy. The Double R spread was one of the most prosperous in the territory, but what good was success when he couldn't save his own son? Since losing his wife Charlotte to childbed fever 6 years ago, Thomas had become his entire world. Now, watching his boy waste away, slipping in and out of consciousness, Caleb had swallowed his pride and written to his brother-in-law, a state official in Helena, begging for help. Inside the ranch house, Caleb checked on Thomas, whose small frame barely made a bump under the quilt. The boy's face was gaunt, his breathing shallow. "We're getting you help, son," Caleb whispered, brushing back the dark hair from Thomas' forehead. "A real nurse is coming all the way from Boston. She'll know what to do." Thomas didn't stir, but Caleb spoke as if he could hear every word. It had been their way since Charlotte died, father and son against the world, a team that couldn't be broken. Until now, Mrs. Patterson's coming over tomorrow to help me ready the guest room, he continued, adjusting the blanket. "We're going to make it nice for the nurse. She's giving up a lot to come help us, so we need to show her proper Montana hospitality." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, reminding Caleb that another day was ending. Another day with Thomas no better, no worse, just lingering in that terrible in-between. The nurse was their last hope. "Please, God," Caleb prayed into the darkness, "let her be worth the wait." Thursday dawned clear and cool, a perfect Montana spring day. Caleb had been up since before sunrise, checking on Thomas, then pacing nervously around the house making sure everything was in order. Mrs. Patterson, the widow who helped with housekeeping, had outdone herself preparing the guest room, bringing fresh wildflowers and her best hand-sewn quilts. "You're wearing a trench in that floor, Caleb Reeves," Mrs. Patterson chided gently. The older woman had been like a mother to him since he arrived in Kearney 15 years ago, a young man with dreams bigger than his experience. "That nurse won't arrive any faster with you fretting." I know, Caleb said, running his hand through his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray at the temples. At 36, he felt decades older. "It's just that Thomas. That boy is strong just like his daddy," Mrs. Patterson assured him. "Now go make yourself presentable. The stage coach will be here in an hour." Caleb reluctantly left Thomas in Mrs. Patterson's capable hands and went to shave and change. Looking in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. The strain of the past month had etched new lines around his eyes and mouth. His normally robust frame had grown leaner, his blue eyes dulled with worry and lack of sleep. The ranch hands had been managing without him, but everything was falling behind. Not that he cared about anything except Thomas' recovery. The sound of the approaching stagecoach sent his heart racing. Caleb strode out onto the porch, watching as the dust cloud grew closer along the road leading to town. He'd arranged for the stage to drop the nurse directly at the ranch rather than in town, knowing every minute might count for Thomas. As the coach rolled to a stop, Caleb straightened his vest and ran a hand through his hair one last time. The door swung open, and the driver offered his hand to help the passenger descend. A small gloved hand appeared first, followed by a young woman dressed in a practical gray traveling suit, her honey blonde hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. She looked younger than Caleb had expected, perhaps in her mid-20s, and far too delicate for the harsh realities of frontier life. "Mr. Reeves," she called, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. Caleb nodded, suddenly unable to find his voice as she approached. "I'm Katherine James," she said, extending her hand. "The nurse from Massachusetts General Hospital. I believe you're expecting me." Her handshake was firm, belying her slight appearance, and Caleb found himself staring into the most determined pair of green eyes he'd ever encountered. "Madam," he finally managed, removing his hat, "I can't thank you enough for coming all this way." "My son, Thomas, I'd like to see my patient immediately, Mr. Reeves," she interrupted, her professional demeanor leaving no room for small talk. "From the telegram I received, time is of the essence." Caleb nodded, both impressed and slightly taken aback by her directness. As the driver unloaded her luggage, a modest trunk, and what appeared to be a large case of medical supplies, Caleb showed Katherine into the house and toward Thomas' room. "He's been in and out of consciousness," Caleb explained as they walked. "The fever comes and goes. Doc Simmons says there's internal bleeding, but he doesn't know how to stop it. The broken leg isn't healing right either." Katherine nodded, absorbing the information without comment. When they entered the bedroom, Mrs. Patterson stood up from beside Thomas' bed, curiosity evident on her kind face. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Nurse James," Caleb introduced them. "She's come from Boston to help Thomas." "Thank the Lord," Mrs. Patterson murmured. "I'll go put on some coffee." "You must be exhausted from your journey, dear." But Katherine had already moved to Thomas' bedside, her attention fully focused on her patient. She removed her hat and gloves, setting them aside without looking. With gentle hands, she felt Thomas' forehead, checked his pulse, and carefully lifted the bandages on his leg. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, her voice softer now as she looked at the boy's pale face. 4 weeks and 3 days, Caleb answered, the exact count coming automatically. He hadn't been able to think of anything else. Katherine nodded, then began a more thorough examination, her movements efficient and practiced. She opened her medical case and removed several instruments Caleb didn't recognize, along with bottles of medicine and fresh bandages. "Mr. Reeves, I'll need hot water, clean towels, and privacy," she said without looking up. "And I'll need to know exactly what happened in detail." For the first time since the accident, Caleb felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Here was someone who knew what to do, who might actually save his son. As he turned to fetch the requested items, Katherine spoke again. "And Mr. Reeves?" "Yes, madam. I will do everything in my power for your son, but I need you to understand his condition is very serious. I make no promises except that I will use every skill I possess." Caleb met her gaze, seeing both compassion and steel in her green eyes. "That's all I can ask, Miss James." For the next several hours, Caleb paced outside Thomas' room, occasionally bringing in fresh water or towels as requested. Katherine worked tirelessly, emerging only once to ask for stronger light and more pillows. Her sleeves were rolled up, her collar loosened, and a sheen of perspiration glistened on her forehead, but her focus never wavered. Night had fallen by the time she finally opened the door fully and beckoned Caleb inside. Thomas lay still, but his breathing seemed deeper, more regular. Fresh bandages wrapped his leg in a different configuration than before, and the bedding had been changed. "I've managed to reduce his fever," Katherine explained. "The leg was improperly set. I've reset it, but he'll need time to heal. As for the internal injuries," she hesitated. "There's inflammation in his abdomen that concerns me. I've given him medicine to reduce it, but we'll need to watch him carefully." "Will he live?" The question Caleb had been afraid to ask anyone else escaped his lips before he could stop it. Catherine's expression softened slightly. "I believe so, Mr. Reeves. Your son has a remarkable constitution, and he's clearly been fighting hard, but the next few days will be critical." Caleb's legs nearly buckled with relief. He steadied himself against the bedpost, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Katherine cautioned. "Now, if you could show me to my room, I need to rest for a few hours. I'll need to check on Thomas every 2 hours through the night." "Of course," Caleb said, suddenly remembering his duties as host. "You must be exhausted. Mrs. Patterson has prepared a room for you, and there's supper waiting whenever you're ready." Katherine nodded, the professional mask slipping just enough to reveal her fatigue. As she gathered her things, Caleb noticed a small locket that had fallen from her pocket onto the floor. He picked it up and handed it to her. "Oh." Her composure faltered as she took it. "Thank you. I would have been devastated to lose this." As her fingers closed around the locket, Caleb caught a glimpse of a photograph inside a young man in a Union Army uniform. "Your husband?" he asked before thinking. A shadow passed over Catherine's face. "My brother. He died at Antietam." "I'm sorry," Caleb said sincerely. "I lost friends in the war too." Katherine tucked the locket safely away. "War takes too much from too many, Mr. Reeves. Now about that supper." The next few days established a rhythm at the Reeves ranch. Katherine maintained a nearly constant vigil over Thomas, only sleeping in short intervals when Caleb insisted on taking watch. She was methodical in her care, changing bandages, administering medicines, and carefully documenting every change in the boy's condition. On the third day, Thomas opened his eyes while Katherine was spooning broth between his lips. His gaze was confused at first, then focused on the unfamiliar face before him. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice weak but clear. Catherine's professional demeanor softened immediately. "I'm Nurse James, but you can call me Katherine. I'm here to help you get better." Thomas blinked slowly. "Where's Pa?" "Right here, son." Caleb hurried to the bedside from where he'd been dozing in the corner chair. "I'm right here." The boy's face relaxed at the sight of his father. "Did Ranger throw me? I remember riding." "Yes, you took quite a fall," Caleb said gently. "But you're going to be all right now. Nurse James has been taking care of you." Thomas looked back at Katherine, studying her with a child's directness. "You talk funny. Are you from back east?" Despite herself, Katherine laughed the first time Caleb had heard the sound. It transformed her face, softening the serious lines and lighting her eyes. "Yes, I'm from Boston," she told Thomas. "And you talk funny to me too." Thomas smiled weakly before his eyes drifted closed again. "I like your laugh," he murmured as he fell back asleep. Caleb's throat tightened with emotion. It was the first coherent conversation his son had had in over a month. He looked at Katherine with undisguised gratitude. "He's turning the corner," she confirmed, answering his unspoken question. "His fever is gone and the inflammation is subsiding. The worst danger has passed, I believe." "Because of you," Caleb said simply. Katherine shook her head. "Because he's strong like his father." The compliment caught Caleb off guard. In the days they'd worked side by side caring for Thomas, Katherine had been unfailingly professional, revealing little of herself beyond her medical knowledge. This small personal observation felt significant somehow. "Will you join me for supper tonight?" he asked impulsively. A real supper at the table, not just whatever Mrs. Patterson can make you eat while standing over Thomas. He's stable enough for us both to take a proper break." Katherine hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." That evening, with Thomas sleeping peacefully and Mrs. Patterson watching over him, Caleb and Katherine sat across from each other at the dining table. She had changed into a simple blue dress, her hair loosened from its severe bun into a softer style that framed her face. Away from the sick room, she looked younger, less guarded. "I realized I never properly welcomed you to Montana," Caleb said as he poured her a glass of wine. "I've been so focused on Thomas that my manners have suffered." "Under the circumstances, manners were hardly important," Katherine replied, but with a smile that took the sting from her words. "Your son needed you. He needed you more," Caleb countered. "I don't know how to thank you, Miss James." "Katherine, please," she corrected him. "And there's no need for thanks. This is my profession." "Most professionals wouldn't travel thousands of miles to help one patient," Caleb pointed out, "especially not to a place as remote as Kearney." Katherine's fingers played with the stem of her wine glass. "I needed a change," she admitted. "After the war, Boston held too many memories." "When the hospital received your brother-in-law's request for medical assistance, I volunteered." "You mentioned your brother," Caleb said carefully. "Did you lose others in the war?" Katherine's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw deep pain there. "My fiancé. We were to be married when he returned. He never did." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, understanding the depth of her loss. "My Charlotte died 6 years ago, childbed fever. Thomas was only 4. "That's very young to lose a mother," Katherine said softly. "He seems like a remarkable boy." "He is," Caleb agreed, his pride evident. "He's been my right hand on the ranch since he was old enough to sit a horse. Too young, probably, but out here, children grow up fast. And now it's just the two of you," Caleb nodded. "Plus the ranch hands and Mrs. Patterson, who's been a godsend." "But yes, it's just us Reeves men against the world, as I tell Thomas." Katherine smiled at that. "A formidable team, I'm sure." The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving to safer topics: Katherine's training at the hospital, Caleb's journey west as a young man seeking his fortune, the challenges and rewards of ranch life. By the time they finished dessert, Caleb realized it was the most he'd talked to another adult in months, perhaps years. "I should check on Thomas," Katherine said finally, rising from her chair. "Let me," Caleb offered. "You've earned a few hours to yourself. Maybe sit on the porch." The Montana sunset is something special this time of year. Katherine looked as if she might argue, then relented. "Very well, but call me if there's any change." Caleb found Thomas sleeping soundly, his color better than it had been in weeks. Mrs. Patterson had dozed off in the rocking chair beside the bed. "Go get some rest, Mrs. Patterson," he whispered, gently waking the older woman. "I'll sit with him now." "He's coming back to us," Mrs. Patterson said as she stood. "That nurse is a miracle worker." "That she is," Caleb agreed, taking her place in the chair. After Mrs. Patterson left, Caleb sat in the quiet room watching his son breathe. For the first time in weeks, the rise and fall of Thomas' chest didn't fill him with dread that each breath might be the last. Hope had returned to the Reeves household, carried there by a slip of a woman with determined green eyes and healing hands. Later, he found Katherine on the porch as suggested, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. She draped a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill, and her hair caught the last rays of sunlight, turning it to burnished gold. "You were right," she said without turning as he approached. "It is something special." Caleb leaned against the porch railing, following her gaze to the horizon. "Makes all the hardships worthwhile seeing that every evening." Katherine nodded. I can understand that. Boston has its beauties, but nothing quite so vast. There's a freedom here I never expected to feel. Is that why you came? Looking for freedom? She considered the question. Perhaps, or perhaps just a different kind of purpose. After losing James and William, my brother and fiancé, I threw myself into nursing. It gave structure to my days when grief threatened to overwhelm me. I understand that too, Caleb said quietly. The ranch saved me after Charlotte died. Always something that needed doing, no time to dwell on what couldn't be changed. They stood in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, brilliant against the darkening blue. I should write to the hospital, Katherine said eventually. They'll want to know I arrived safely and how Thomas is progressing. How long can you stay? Caleb asked, the question that had been weighing on him finally spoken aloud. Katherine turned to face him. My arrangement was for 6 weeks. Will that be sufficient, 6 weeks? It seemed both an eternity and not nearly long enough. Thomas should be well on the mend by then, Caleb acknowledged. But we'll miss you when you go. The words hung in the air between them, more revealing than Caleb had intended. Katherine's eyes widened slightly, and a flush spread across her cheeks. I should check on Thomas, she said, breaking the moment. Good night, Mr. Reeves, Caleb, he corrected. If I'm to call you Katherine, then fair's fair. She paused at the door, a small smile touching her lips. Good night, Caleb. As the days passed, Thomas grew stronger. The first time he sat up in bed without assistance, both Caleb and Katherine celebrated as if it were a miracle. When he managed his first steps, leaning heavily on his father's arm while Katherine supervised, tears shone in all their eyes. Life at the ranch settled into a new pattern. Katherine continued to oversee Thomas' recovery, but as he improved, she found time for other pursuits. She joined Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen, learning to make biscuits and preserves. She began exploring the ranch, first on short walks around the house, then on longer excursions. Caleb found himself looking forward to their conversations in the evenings, when Thomas was asleep and the day's work was done. They'd sit on the porch or by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once had. Katherine revealed a dry wit that often caught him by surprise, while Caleb found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone in years. 3 weeks after Katherine's arrival, Thomas insisted on going outside to see his horse. Ranger had been confined to the barn since the accident, tended by the ranch hands but missing his young master. Are you sure he's ready? Caleb asked Katherine privately as Thomas dressed with painful slowness, determined to wear proper clothes instead of nightshirts. The fresh air will do him good, Katherine assured him. And seeing the horse that injured him is important to overcome any fear before it takes root. Caleb nodded, impressed once again by her insight. He'd been worried about exactly that Thomas might develop a fear of horses that would cripple him more surely than any physical injury in a life where horsemanship was essential. The three of them made a slow procession to the barn, Thomas supported between them, his face set with determination despite the pain each step caused. When they reached Ranger's stall, the horse whinnied in recognition, pushing his nose toward Thomas eagerly. Hey, boy, Thomas said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Did you miss me? Caleb watched anxiously as his son reached out to stroke the horse's muzzle. There was no fear in the boy's eyes, only joy at the reunion. Relief flooded through him and he glanced at Katherine, finding her watching not the boy and horse but him. The understanding in her eyes made his heart skip. Can I sit on him, Pa? Thomas asked. Just for a minute, absolutely not, Katherine answered before Caleb could speak. Your leg is nowhere near healed enough for that. But perhaps in another week, if you continue to improve, you might sit on him while your father holds the reins. Just standing still, mind you." Thomas beamed at this compromise, and Caleb felt a surge of gratitude toward Katherine for finding the perfect balance, maintaining medical caution while giving Thomas something to work toward. "You heard the nurse," Caleb told his son, ruffling his hair. "1 week of good behavior and progress, and you'll get your wish." Later, after they'd settled Thomas back in bed for a rest, Caleb found Katherine in the garden, helping Mrs. Patterson gather vegetables for supper. "You were wonderful with him today," he said, leaning on the fence. "You knew exactly what he needed to hear." Katherine straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "It wasn't so different from what you would have said." "Maybe, but he listens to you differently. You're not his father, always telling him to be careful." "Children often do better with a neutral third party," Katherine said, but looked pleased at the compliment. "Thomas is a remarkable boy. You've raised him well, Caleb." "I've done my best," he said. "Not always sure it's been enough, though. A boy needs a mother." Katherine's expression grew thoughtful. "He has love and security. Many children have far less, even with 2 parents. You shouldn't doubt yourself." Her words warmed him in a way few things had since Charlotte died. "Will you join me for a ride tomorrow? Thomas is well enough for Mrs. Patterson to watch him for a few hours. I'd like to show you some of the ranch beyond what you can see from the house." Katherine hesitated, and for a moment Caleb thought she would decline. Then she nodded. "I'd like that, though I should warn you I'm not much of a horsewoman." Caleb grinned. "Don't worry. I've got the perfect mount for you. Old Bessie is so gentle a child could ride her." The next morning dawned clear and warm. Caleb saddled Bessie for Katherine and his own horse, a spirited chestnut gelding named Firecracker. When Katherine emerged from the house in a borrowed riding skirt, courtesy of Mrs. Patterson's niece, Caleb had to remind himself to breathe. Her hair was braided and pinned up practically for riding, but a few tendrils had already escaped to frame her face. "Will this do?" she asked, gesturing to her outfit. "It's been years since I've ridden." "You look perfect," Caleb assured her, then flushed at his own words. "I mean, perfectly suitable for riding." Katherine's smile suggested she understood what he meant. With surprising grace, she allowed him to help her mount Bessie, settling herself side saddle with only minimal adjustment. "My father insisted my brother and I both learn to ride," she explained, noting his raised eyebrow. "He believed in equal education for his children, regardless of conventional expectations." "A progressive man," Caleb commented, mounting Firecracker. "Yes," Katherine agreed. "He was a physician, and my mother was one of the first female medical assistants in Boston. They encouraged my interest in medicine from an early age." As they rode across the ranch, Caleb pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his early days in Montana. The vastness of the landscape seemed to awe Katherine, who kept stopping to take in the views of mountains and rolling grasslands. "It's beautiful," she said as they paused on a ridge overlooking a creek where a small herd of Caleb's cattle grazed. "So different from anything I've known." "Do you miss the city?" Caleb asked. Katherine considered before answering. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, the bustle of activity, but there's something cleansing about this openness." She spread her arms wide. Room to breathe, to think. No constant reminders of what was lost. Caleb understood completely. It was why he'd come west himself, seeking a clean slate after his parents' deaths had left him alone in Virginia with nothing but painful memories. "Sometimes a fresh start is the greatest gift," he said quietly. Katherine's eyes met his, and something passed between them, recognition of a kindred spirit who understood loss and the courage it took to begin again. They continued their ride, stopping to rest by the creek. Caleb had packed a simple lunch, and they sat on a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree, sharing bread, cheese, and apples. "Thomas asked me yesterday if I was going to be his new mother," Katherine said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. Caleb nearly choked on his apple. "He what?" "I'm sorry, Katherine. I'll speak to him." "No, don't," she said quickly. "I wasn't upset. I was just surprised. I told him I was his nurse and his friend." "What did he say to that?" Katherine's cheeks colored slightly. "He said that was a good start because his father liked me too." Caleb groaned, covering his face with his hand. "Out of the mouths of babes, I apologize for my son's lack of subtlety." To his surprise, Katherine laughed. "He's observant, I'll give him that, and honest like his father." Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. Caleb felt his heart pounding as if he'd run for miles. "Katherine," he began, not entirely sure what he was going to say. "We should head back," she interrupted, standing abruptly. "Thomas will be wondering where we are." The moment broken, Caleb could only nod and help her pack up their picnic. As they rode back to the ranch, a comfortable silence between them, he found himself wondering what might have happened if she hadn't stopped him from speaking. What might he have said? What did he want to say? The truth, he realized, was both simple and terrifying. In the short time Katherine had been at the ranch, she had become essential to him in a way no one had been since Charlotte died. And in less than 3 weeks, she would be gone, back to Boston and her life there. The thought left him cold despite the warm spring sunshine. When they returned to the ranch, they found Thomas sitting on the porch with Mrs. Patterson, playing checkers. The boy's face lit up at the sight of them. "Pa, Katherine, did you show her the whole ranch?" "Did you see any wolves, Katherine?" "Last spring we saw a whole pack down by the creek." Katherine dismounted with Caleb's help, her hand lingering in his perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "No wolves today, just peaceful cattle and beautiful views." "Your father is very lucky to have such a wonderful place." "We're lucky," Thomas corrected her. "It's our ranch, not just Pa's." "Of course," Katherine agreed with a smile. "The double R belongs to both Reeves men." Mrs. Patterson gave Caleb a knowing look as she gathered up the checkers board. "Thomas has had his medicine and lunch. He's been a perfect gentleman all morning." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Caleb said. "Will you stay for supper?" "Not today," the older woman declined. "My sister's coming by the house. You three enjoy your evening." As she left, Thomas looked between his father and Katherine with undisguised hope. "Can we eat supper on the porch since it's so nice out? And can Katherine read more of that book afterward?" Katherine had been reading Treasure Island to Thomas in the evenings, a chapter each night. The boy had become entranced by the adventure story, and Caleb found himself looking forward to the readings as much as his son did. "If Katherine's not too tired from our ride," Caleb hedged. "I'm not tired at all," Katherine assured them. "Supper on the porch sounds lovely, and I'm eager to find out what happens to Jim Hawkins next myself." The evening that followed was one Caleb knew he would remember for the rest of his life. The three of them ate on the porch as the sun set, laughing and talking like a family. Thomas, improving daily under Katherine's care, was animated and hungry for the first time in weeks. Katherine, relaxed after their day's outing, shared stories of her childhood in Boston that had both Reeves men captivated. After supper, they moved inside to the sitting room, where Katherine read 2 chapters of Treasure Island by lamplight, her voice changing for each character until even Caleb was caught up in the tale. When Thomas finally fell asleep on the sofa, Caleb carried him to bed while Katherine turned down the lamps. "He's getting heavier," Caleb commented as he returned to the sitting room. "A good sign. He's regaining his strength." "Yes," Katherine agreed. "Another week and he'll be pestering you to let him ride properly. not just sit on Ranger while you hold the reins." "And what will I do then?" Caleb asked softly. "When he doesn't need a nurse anymore?" The question hung in the air between them, its true meaning clear to both. Katherine's 6 weeks were half gone. Soon she would have no professional reason to stay in Montana. "Caleb," she began, her voice uncertain. A pounding at the door interrupted whatever she had been about to say. Caleb opened it to find his foreman, Jake Miller, looking urgent. "Sorry to disturb you so late, boss, but we've got trouble. Rustlers hit the north pasture. They've taken at least 20 head, maybe more." "Damn," Caleb cursed, then glanced apologetically at Katherine. "Sorry, madam." Jake, "Gather the men. We'll head out right away." "Already done." "They're waiting for you." Caleb turned to Katherine. "I have to go." "Will you?" "I'll look after Thomas," she assured him. "Be careful, Caleb." The concern in her voice warmed him even as he grabbed his hat and gun belt. "Always am." "Don't know when I'll be back. Could be a day or more if we have to track them far." "We'll be here," Katherine said simply. With a last look at her standing in the doorway, lamplight haloing her blonde hair, Caleb mounted Firecracker and rode out with his men. The rustlers had indeed taken more than 20 head of Caleb's prize breeding stock, a significant loss for any rancher. The trail led north toward the Canadian border, and Caleb and his men rode hard through the night and the next day in pursuit. They caught up with the rustlers near a remote mountain, past 4 men driving the stolen cattle. The ensuing confrontation was brief but violent. One of the rustlers was killed in the exchange of gunfire, another wounded and captured, while the remaining 2 escaped into the rugged terrain. Caleb's men suffered minor injuries, but they recovered all the stolen cattle. It was nearly 3 days later when they finally returned to the ranch, dusty and exhausted but successful. As they approached the house, Caleb saw Katherine and Thomas on the porch, the boy standing with the aid of a crutch Katherine had fashioned for him, both of them shading their eyes against the setting sun. "Pa," Thomas called as Caleb dismounted. "Did you catch the rustlers? Are you hurt?" Caleb embraced his son carefully, mindful of his healing injuries. "We got most of them and all the cattle. I'm fine, just tired and in desperate need of a bath." His eyes met Katherine's over Thomas' head, and the relief he saw there made his heart skip. She had been worried for him. "There's hot water ready," she told him. "Mrs. Patterson and I have been keeping it heated since we heard you were on your way back, and supper will be ready soon." "You're an angel," Caleb told her with feeling, then turned to his foreman. "Jake, get the men settled and the cattle back where they belong. Double the night watch for the next week, just in case those 2 who got away decide to try again." As the men dispersed, Caleb followed Katherine and Thomas into the house. Thomas was chattering excitedly, asking questions about the pursuit and capture that Caleb answered in deliberately vague terms, not wanting to glorify the violence of the encounter. "And I can walk with the crutch now," Thomas announced proudly. "Katherine made it for me. She says I'm healing faster than she expected." "That's wonderful, son," Caleb said, genuinely delighted at the progress. "You'll be running circles around me in no time." After the promised bath and a hearty supper, Caleb found himself alone with Katherine on the porch once more. Thomas had gone to bed early, exhausted from the excitement of his father's return. "I was worried," Katherine admitted, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "when you didn't return the first day." "Rustlers are a fact of life out here," Caleb said. "But they don't usually get far with double R cattle. We've got a reputation." "So I gathered from what the ranch hands told Mrs. Patterson," Katherine said with a small smile. "The fearsome Caleb Reeves who always gets his cattle back." Caleb chuckled. "They exaggerate. But I don't take kindly to thieves." Another silence fell, but this one felt charged with unspoken words. "Katherine," Caleb finally said, turning to face her. "Before I left, we were talking about what happens when Thomas doesn't need a nurse anymore." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside. "Yes, I'll be expected back in Boston. The hospital only granted me a 6-week leave." "And is that what you want, to go back?" Katherine looked out at the darkened ranch, her expression unreadable. "A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Boston is all I've ever known. My work there is important." "And now," Caleb pressed gently. She turned to him, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "Now I'm not so certain. Montana has a way of getting under one's skin. The openness, the beauty. The people." Caleb took a step closer to her. "Any people in particular?" A smile touched her lips. "Perhaps. A certain stubborn rancher and his equally stubborn son have made quite an impression." "We Reeves men tend to do that," Caleb said, returning her smile. "Katherine, I know it's too soon, and I know you have a life waiting for you in Boston, but these past weeks, having you here—" He struggled to find the right words. "Thomas isn't the only one who's been healing." Katherine's breath caught. "Caleb, I'm not asking for any promises," he hurried on. "I just want you to know that if you were considering staying in Montana for any reason, you would be most welcome at the Double R, in whatever capacity you chose." Their eyes held, the moment stretching between them like a taut rope. "I need time to think," Katherine finally said. "This is unexpected." "Of course," Caleb agreed, stepping back to give her space. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Katherine nodded, then impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being honest. Good night, Caleb." As she disappeared into the house, Caleb remained on the porch, his hand still warm from her touch, hope and uncertainty battling within him. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Thomas continued to improve rapidly under Katherine's care, graduating from the crutch to walking with just a cane. His internal injuries had healed well, leaving only the mending leg as evidence of his accident. Katherine pronounced herself satisfied with his progress, though she insisted he still needed rest and careful monitoring. Meanwhile, Caleb threw himself into ranch work, catching up on all that had been neglected during Thomas' illness. The spring cattle drive was approaching, and preparations needed to be made. He found himself staying out longer each day, partly because there was genuinely much to do, and partly to avoid putting pressure on Katherine as she considered her future. They still shared meals and evenings together, finishing Treasure Island and starting the adventures of Tom Sawyer at Thomas' request. These domestic scenes grew increasingly precious to Caleb, who found himself memorizing the details, the way Katherine tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the sound of Thomas' laughter, the feeling of contentment that filled the house that had for too long been merely a place to eat and sleep between work days. One evening, about a week before Katherine's scheduled departure, Caleb returned from checking fence lines to find her sitting alone on the porch, a letter in her hands. "Thomas already in bed?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Yes, he was tired from his exercises today," Katherine replied, folding the letter carefully. "He's determined to build his strength back as quickly as possible." Caleb nodded toward the letter. "News from home," Katherine hesitated, then handed it to him. "From the hospital. They're expecting me back on schedule. There's a position waiting for me, head nurse of the children's ward. It's quite an honor, something I've worked toward for years." Caleb felt his heart sink even as he tried to smile for her. "That's wonderful, Katherine. You deserve such recognition." "It's everything I thought I wanted," she said quietly. The emphasis on thought wasn't lost on Caleb. And now Katherine stood, moving to the porch railing where she gazed out at the Montana twilight. "Now I'm torn. Boston is familiar, safe. The work is important, and I'm good at it. But Caleb prompted, coming to stand beside her. But it's no longer the only place I can imagine being happy, she admitted, turning to face him. Caleb, these weeks at the Double R have changed me, shown me possibilities I never considered. Hope surged within him. Such as finding joy in simple things, sunsets and shared meals and a boy's laughter. Such as discovering that healing comes in many forms, not just for the body but for the heart as well. She took a deep breath. Such as realizing that sometimes what we think we want isn't what we truly need. Caleb reached for her hand, his heart pounding. "And what do you need, Katherine James?" "I need to know that if I stayed, it wouldn't just be as Thomas' nurse," she said, her green eyes meeting his directly. "That there might be room in your life, in your heart, for something more." "Katherine," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion, "there's been room in my heart for you almost from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. I just never dared hope you might feel the same." The smile that illuminated her face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "And yet here we are." "Here we are," he agreed, gently drawing her closer. "Katherine, I know it's asking a lot. Montana is nothing like Boston. The winters are harsh, the work never ending. The nearest proper town is miles away. But if you could see yourself building a life here with Thomas and me, I promise you would never regret it." "I've already made my decision," Katherine said softly. "I wrote to the hospital yesterday declining the position. I told them I'd found somewhere my skills were more urgently needed." Caleb's heart soared. "And have you found such a place?" "I believe I have," she murmured, her eyes never leaving his. "A certain ranch in Montana that seems to be in desperate need of someone to look after its two stubborn male inhabitants." "We are rather hopeless without you," Caleb agreed, smiling down at her. "Katherine, are you sure? Boston is your home." "Boston was my home," she corrected him. "But homes can change. People can change. The war taught me that nothing is permanent except what we hold in our hearts." Her hand came up to rest against his chest. "And my heart is telling me that my place is here now." Caleb could no longer resist. He bent his head and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as Katherine responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that since our ride to the creek," Caleb admitted. Katherine laughed softly. "I've wanted you to do that since our first dinner together at the table. I think I've been falling in love with you since you stood over Thomas that first day, refusing to make promises but determined to save him anyway," Caleb said, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you, Katherine James." "And I love you, Caleb Reeves," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "More than I ever thought possible." Their second kiss was interrupted by a whoop from the doorway. They turned to find Thomas standing there, leaning on his cane but practically bouncing with excitement. "I knew it," the boy crowed. "I told you she'd stay, Pa, didn't I say so?" Caleb laughed, keeping one arm around Katherine as he beckoned his son to join them. "You did indeed, son, though eavesdropping isn't polite." "I wasn't eavesdropping," Thomas protested. "I just happened to need a glass of water right when you were kissing Katherine on the porch." Katherine's laughter joined Caleb's, and she opened her arm to include Thomas in their embrace. The boy came eagerly, hugging them both. "So you're staying?" Thomas asked, looking up at Katherine hopefully. "For good," Katherine exchanged a glance with Caleb before answering. "Yes, Thomas, if that's truly what you want." "More than anything," the boy said fervently. "You make Pa smile again, and you make the best biscuits, even better than Mrs. Patterson's, but don't tell her I said so." "Your secret is safe with me," Katherine assured him, ruffling his hair. "Now back to bed with you. Your leg still needs rest to heal properly." Thomas made a face but obeyed, pausing at the door. "Does this mean you're going to be my new mother?" Caleb looked at Katherine, letting her answer. "Would you like that, Thomas?" she asked gently. The boy nodded emphatically. More than anything. I don't remember my real mother much, but Pa says she was kind and smart and pretty. You're all those things too. Then yes, Katherine said, her voice thick with emotion. If your father agrees, someday soon I would be honored to be your mother. Pa. Thomas looked expectantly at his father. Caleb cleared his throat, unexpectedly moved by the moment. Nothing would make me happier, son. But these things take time to arrange properly. Now, bed. For real this time. Once Thomas had gone, grumbling good-naturedly about being sent to bed while important matters were being discussed, Caleb turned back to Katherine. I wasn't planning to propose quite so abruptly, he said ruefully. I had thought to court you properly first. Katherine's smile was radiant. I think we're well past the need for conventional courtship, don't you? We've been living under the same roof for over a month. We've weathered a medical crisis, a cattle rustling, and nightly readings of adventure novels together. If that's not a foundation for marriage, I don't know what is. Caleb laughed, pulling her close again. When you put it that way. Katherine James, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of being a mother to Thomas and mistress of this chaotic ranch? Of sharing all the sunsets and sunrises and everything in between with me for the rest of our days? Yes, she said simply. With all my heart, yes. 3 months later, on a perfect summer day, Caleb Reeves and Katherine James were married in the garden of the Double R Ranch. Thomas stood proudly as his father's best man, completely recovered from his injuries and beaming with happiness. Mrs. Patterson cried throughout the ceremony, while the ranch hands cleaned up and wore their Sunday best to honor the occasion. The new Reverend Johnson from Kearney performed the service, and afterward, the entire community gathered to celebrate. It was the social event of the season, with families traveling from miles around to witness the union of the territory's most eligible widower and the Eastern nurse who had captured his heart. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Caleb found a moment alone with his bride. They stood on the same porch where they had first acknowledged their feelings, Katherine radiant in a simple cream-colored wedding gown that Mrs. Patterson and the women of Kearney had helped create. Happy, Mrs. Reeves? Caleb asked, still marveling at the sound of her new name. Completely, Katherine assured him, leaning into his embrace. Though I'm not sure I'll ever get used to that name. You have a lifetime to practice, Caleb promised, kissing her forehead. A lifetime of Montana sunsets and Double R adventures. And a lifetime of caring for my 2 Reeves men, Katherine added, her eyes finding Thomas across the yard where he was proudly showing off his roping skills to some admiring young ladies from town. Though I suspect our family may grow in time. Caleb's heart swelled at the thought. I would like that very much. Thomas has always wanted siblings. And what about his father? Katherine asked teasingly. What does he want? Everything, Caleb said honestly. Everything I never dared hope for again after losing Charlotte. A partner to share my life, children to fill our home with laughter, love to warm the cold Montana winters. He cupped her cheek tenderly. You've given me back my heart, Katherine. I didn't even realize how frozen it had become until you thawed it. We healed each other, Katherine said softly. You gave me purpose when I was drifting, anchored only by my work. You and Thomas showed me that life could be full again, even after devastating loss. From the yard, music started up as the fiddler began playing a waltz. Caleb offered Katherine his hand with a formal bow. May I have this dance, Mrs. Reeves? You may have every dance for the rest of our lives, Mr. Reeves, she answered, placing her hand in his. As they joined the other couples swirling under the stars, Caleb held his bride close and gave thanks for the twist of fate that had brought her to his door. She had come to nurse his wounded son, but in doing so, had healed his own wounded heart and found healing for her own as well. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you," Katherine replied, "now and always." Around them the celebration continued, but in their hearts, a quieter, deeper celebration had already begun, one that would last a lifetime, through all the joys and sorrows that lay ahead. The Double R Ranch, once merely Caleb's refuge from grief, had become a true home again, filled with love and the promise of new beginnings. 5 years later, the Double R Ranch had changed in 5 years. New buildings had been added, the herd had grown, and the house itself had expanded to accommodate the growing Reeves family. On this particular summer morning, Caleb stood on the porch watching his wife in the garden, their 2-year-old daughter Charlotte, helping her mother pick vegetables for dinner. Thomas, now 15 and nearly as tall as Caleb, rode into the yard, returning from his morning chores. The young man, really dismounted with easy grace, his earlier injuries long healed without even a limp to show for them. "The north pasture fence is fixed, Pa," Thomas reported. "Jake says the new calves are looking strong this year." "Good work," Caleb said, clapping his son on the shoulder. "Your mother's been asking when you'd be back. Something about a reading lesson for Charlotte." Thomas grinned. "That little bookworm is already trying to read everything she can get her hands on, takes after her mother." "And her big brother," Caleb pointed out. Thomas had inherited Katherine's love of books and learning, devouring every volume they could obtain and talking of attending university someday, a dream both Caleb and Katherine encouraged. Katherine looked up from the garden and waved, her face lighting with a smile that still made Caleb's heart race. She was even more beautiful to him now than the day they'd met, motherhood and happiness having added a special radiance to her features. Charlotte spotted her brother and came running, her dark curls bouncing and her green eyes so like her mother's sparkling with excitement. "Tommy! Tommy! Book time!" Thomas swung his little sister into the air, making her squeal with delight. "Let me wash up first, Lottie. I've been fixing fences all morning." As his children headed inside, Caleb walked to the garden to help Katherine with her harvest. She straightened as he approached, one hand moving to the small of her back. "Tired?" he asked, concerned. At 4 months along with their second child, Katherine was beginning to show, though she insisted on maintaining her normal activities. "Just a bit," she admitted, allowing him to take the basket of vegetables. "Your son or daughter has been particularly active today." Caleb laid a gentle hand on the slight swell of her stomach. "Already causing trouble, definitely a Reeves," Katherine laughed, covering his hand with her own. "Or a James. My mother always said I never stopped moving before I was born." They walked together toward the house, arms around each other's waists. From inside came the sound of Thomas reading aloud, his voice deeper now but still carrying the enthusiasm he'd always had for a good story. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real," Katherine confessed, pausing to look up at her husband. "That night you asked me to stay if I had chosen differently." "But you didn't," Caleb reminded her, kissing her forehead. "You chose us. You chose this life." "The best choice I ever made," she said with conviction. As they entered their home, filled with the sounds and warmth of family, Caleb reflected on how completely his life had transformed in 5 short years. The lonely cowboy who had once lived only for his son and his ranch had found a fullness of joy he'd never imagined possible. And it had all begun with a desperate telegram and a determined nurse who had come to heal his son, but had ended up healing them all. "Thank you," he whispered to Katherine as they joined their children. She didn't need to ask what for. Her answering smile said she understood completely. "Always," she whispered back. "Now and forever." And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had built together. Caleb knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where they were both meant to be, two wounded hearts, made whole again through love.